It's really good to have you here today for a really important discussion around power and privilege. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Laura Gilchrist. I live in Manchester with my husband and 2 children. I've been involved with our Common Change group here since it formed. In my professional work, I'm a leadership coach, and I'm going to hand over to Matt to introduce the context for this session.
Great, thanks, Laura. Yeah, Matt Wilson here. So a lot of you know me, but not all of you do. I live in the northeast of England, and I'm the chair of Common Change. And yeah, so I co-host this Common Good Canteen once a month at lunchtime with my old friend Laura. Laura, why don't you get us moving on from and introduce what we're all about today?
Okay, so just a few practical things as we kick off, which is to let you know that we are recording this session today, which is for people that might not be able to make this particular slot in the day. We're going to be talking about power and privilege, and we're really delighted to have Mike here with us to help us with this topic. We will be having breakout rooms later on, 2 slots of breakout rooms, one for you to just introduce yourselves, why you've showed up today, why you've given your precious time to be here, and the second one more to dive into the topic. But before we get to that, I would love it, Mike. I know you're friends with Matt, but this is the first time we've met. So maybe if you could just introduce yourself for my benefit and those here that don't know you, tell us a bit about you and your background and where you're from.
Yes, my name's Mike Royal. I live here in Birmingham. I am the co-chief executive of Cinnamon Network UK, helping churches with their community engagement, and I have a long history of involvement in the Christian third sector.
Brilliant. And Mike, it's so good to see you. We've worked together before, and I appreciate you taking the time to spend this lunchtime with us today. So what we do at Common Change, I think you've got a degree of sort of familiarity with what we're all about, but we do recognise that the way our economy is structured often pushes people apart instead of bringing them together, and so we like to use money and resources in ways that bring people together, and so that's kind of the sort of broad context for these conversations that we do. Because we do this at lunchtime, we have a regular question that we put to every guest. And it's kind of linked to the theme of food and encounters that happen around food. If we weren't under lockdown, one of the things that we love to do at Common Change is generosity dinners. We love to get people together to talk and to think about the needs in their communities. So I'd just be interested in if you could perhaps tell us of a memorable meal, a memorable time when you saw bridges being built around a meal table, when you saw that used in a way to bring people together who might have otherwise not connected with one another.
Well, I've just come from my church, in Lodge Road in Hockley in Birmingham, and I've just left. Breakfast being served for a support group that we're running there. You are allowed to run support groups during COVID, and I've just left there, and sausages and eggs and beans and bacon were being served for everyone, and it was just beautiful. It was buzzing. Yes, people were, of course, wearing masks and socially distancing, but it was just lovely to see the community coming together. And that happens all the time. And so my encouragement is for folks is letting this not be a sort of an every now and then thing, but it should be a weekly occurrence, something that happens often. It's great to gather around food.
Great stuff. And I hope that we might have a chance to do that again some point soon, Mike.
That'd be great.
So, Laura, can you tell us a little bit about breakout groups?
Okay, so we're going to just get you into breakout groups now to explain, just to introduce yourself, sort of say what's prompted you to come to this particular session today, and any thoughts that you have just briefly around the topic. I think we've got just about 5 minutes for this. Is that right, Matt? So it's literally a couple of minutes each.
I know, not everybody on the call will be an extrovert. For some of you, this one might be the sort of the most awkward bit of the conversation. But this is why we do this as a Zoom call and not as a podcast. It's because it's as much about connecting with one another as it is sort of listening to our guests and hearing the great stuff they've got to say. So yeah, do get introduced to one another now for a few minutes, and we'll see you in 5 minutes' time.
So let's dive in here to talk to you, Mike. We've invited you here because, we recognise that we need help to see what we don't see because of our white privilege, and we're hoping that you will help us to become more aware of some of the power dynamics that might affect, just the way we interact in the world, but particularly our giving activities within, some of the common change groups that we're part of.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And yeah, so Mike, I think, we see so many shocking examples of Black people suffering because of the way that power in society is so imbalanced. And is there any one moment that for you, perhaps over the last year or two, that this has been rising in the consciousness? Is there any one moment that stands out as a turning point for you?
Yeah, I think that the moment where Amy Cooper, who was walking a dog in Central Park in New York in May 2020, suddenly meets and inadvertently a Black man called Christian Cooper, no relation, who was a bird watcher. So he was, watching the birds flying around, and she had a dog on a lead. The dog is very unruly. Actually, it's all on video. You can just Google it and it comes up. And he asked her to put her unruly dog on a lead. Well, it's not the dog that's unruly, but and her response was, I won't, and actually I'm going to ring the police and I'm going to tell them that an African American man is threatening my life. And that's what she did. And he was wise enough to video the whole event. And so that whole thing then gets played back across the global World Wide Web. And what it shows and it demonstrates is that some, not all, some people will collude with a system that they know is oppressive and unjust, and will misuse their power and their privilege. And actually, before I came on here, I actually rewatched it, and I found it quite traumatic. I found it traumatic because of what it showed, what it demonstrated in terms of what I've just said. But actually, I've experienced that myself. I remember a particular leader sitting me down and telling me what he wanted me to do as another third sector leader, and threatening that if I didn't do that, that the funding for my cause would be cut off. And it was a classic example again of someone who knows the system and takes a decision that they're going to collude with unjust systems. This stuff happens.
Wow.
It's thank you for sharing that, Mike. It's really shocking to hear of both your personal experience and that example. I haven't seen the video that you referred to, so I'm going to go and watch it after this, and I'm sure there'll be others doing so. If you're on the call and you're tempted to Google it now, I just encourage you to hold off until afterwards. You know, thank you for sharing that. And I think one of the things that's happened this past year is a real coming to light of a lot of these abuses of power that we're seeing, particularly with regards to Black people. And, you know, I know a lot of us are quite shocked about that. And then I speak to my Black friends and they're shocked that I'm shocked. And what I'm also really interested to hear from you when we talk, I know you talked to Matt about this in the conversation you had before the session, is when we think about this concept of power, is power always destined to be something that's abused, or can it be transformed, I guess? Can it be redeemed? What's your perspective on that?
It can absolutely be transformed and redeemed, because, you know, most of us have some kind of power. I'm an educated man, and that means that I do have some power. I'm a Black man, and I recognise the disadvantage of that. But as a man, I also recognise that I have a role to make sure that I am being an ally of women, for example. So it can absolutely be redeemed. And I'll give you a great example. I mean, I think that the work that Marcus Rashford has done in actually taking on the government around holiday hunger is a prime example of a young Black man who could just carry on kicking a ball around, but actually took his own lived experience and decided to fight for a cause that he could have chosen to walk by on the other side of the road. But instead, he leans into it, and he gets pushback from government, because if you remember, the government kind of said, no, we will not pay for meals during the holiday period. And he pushed back. And of course, he had the public on his side. He was reading the mood of the nation, the government misreading the mood of the nation. And of course, he won. And incredibly, he was given an MBE for his efforts, as well as, most importantly, really making sure that holiday hunger is reduced, which in the 6th largest economy in the world is an absolute travesty.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, just to pick you up there then on that idea of the sort of the mood of the moment that we're in, I feel like we're in potentially quite a delicate sort of moment as a country. Actually, it's hard for me to tell. I can't really tell whether things are getting better or getting worse, really. There just seems to be, you know, quite a lot of chaos around. I'm interested in, you know, what you're reading of the moment that we're in. How do you see it?
We're in a moment of tension. And I think people often want to kind of swerve away from tension. They kind of want to quickly get to unity and peace. But you know, it was Martin Luther King that said that true peace is not the absence of tension, it's the presence of justice. And I'm really comfortable with a deep level of tension if we are grappling with issues that are, for some, a choice, but for others, a life and death. And actually, that's where we are now. So some people can go, oh, well, that's just the woke stuff. We won't engage. We'll carry on as we are. But for other people, well, when it impacts your community and your family and your children and your future generations, you haven't got that privilege. And so you lean in even further. I'm in the latter camp.
I think you've made such an important point there, Mike. I want to just reflect it back because I think it bears repeating, which is that, you know, part of the privilege is that some people have the choice to not face in and lean into the reality of what's going on, and others don't, because they're living the reality day in, day out. And I see a real kind of bringing together there of the, you know, some of the things we're talking about here around racism, around power. And, you know, after the events of last year, I think, like a lot of white people I know, sort of took a deep look inwards and tried to lean in, and started some conversations with some of my Black friends. And one of the bits of feedback I got from them was, you really need to do the work. And you know, I'm seeing this on social media, I'm reading it, and I'm really curious with that phrase, do the work. What does that mean to you as a Black man when that phrase is used? You know, if I was to ask you that question.
Laura, thanks. That's a great question. So let me give you an example of what not doing the work looks like. Of course, recently we've had the whole situation with the Oprah Winfrey interview with Harry and Meghan. And however we feel about it, the truth is that Meghan has expressed a lived experience that actually that whole issue of colorism, if you actually talk to particularly people of dual heritage, you'll find that that's a common experience. So she wasn't making that up. But a reporter shouts out to Prince William the following week, are you a racist family? And his answer is that, I think, how does he put it? Very much not a racist family. Well, actually, the truth is that here is someone who is representing an institution that has been involved in slavery, in empire, and in colonialism. And you're saying that we are very much not a racist family. It's problematic also because we actually need to move away from this idea that we're either racist or we're not racist. Actually, all of us need to go on a journey where we actually become anti-racist, but actually move along a continuum where we are looking at ourselves, we are checking our own attitudes, we are listening to voices that sometimes previously we wouldn't have listened to. We are doing the reading, we are doing the research, we are educating ourselves to the point where actually we can confront those issues. Because the truth is, issues of prejudice are within all of us. And that's why what Prince William said was so problematic.
Yeah, wow, thank you, Mike. Yeah, that's one of the parts of the conversation I'm going to be watching back again on the recording, because there's a lot in what you said there that I think we need to sort of unpack. And in fact, I think that's probably a good time to head into our breakout groups, and maybe with that final question that Laura just asked, ringing in our ears about what does it mean to do the work. Well, we're just sat here guessing what you might have been talking about there, and we'd love to hear a little bit of it. The way we normally do this, for those who haven't joined us for a Common Good Canteen before, is we would just ask you just to type in the chat if you've got something that you think was important that cropped up in your group, and particularly if it's something that you want to put to Mike as a question. So, you know, hey, we were talking about this, Mike, what do you think? So anybody in the group, you can just get on your keyboard. It might be a bit more tricky if you're joining us on your mobile phone and you've got to kind of get your busy thumbs. But Laura's going to scan the chat, and as we start to see a few comments appear, we can sort of read those out and pitch them to Mike. So don't be shy. If something cropped up in your group that you felt was important and you'd like to others to hear about it, you feel it could potentially be a discussion point for us for a few minutes now, between now and 1:30, then do go and stick something in the chat there. I can see we've got a couple of things appearing there, Laura.
Yeah, we've got Greg saying, I wish we could have another 10 minutes. It sounds like you got into a really great conversation there, Greg. And one of the things we talked about in our small group there was just the importance of having these conversations and opening up spaces where we can continue to have these conversations together. So I just want to...
On that point, actually, I guess there's nothing to stop us. And Greg, thank you for your email, because you emailed me or messaged me after the last Come on Good Canteen. I guess there's nothing to stop us opening up a breakout room at the end of the session, and anybody who wants to stick around for another 10 minutes, we can pop off into a breakout room together and continue to talk.
Yeah. We've got Anna saying Nick spoke of the importance of an awareness of our depravity and sinfulness and the impact of our brokenness. Sounds like you had a very generative conversation there. Mark says, I'm really keen that we don't make conversations about race a conversation about us white folk. Keen not to make us the topic of the conversation. That's a great point. Thanks for that, Mark. Sounds like another important discussion that you had there. And this is a great question from Andy. This is for you, Mike. What guidance would you give about how to be an effective ally or advocate? So if I can just put that one to you.
Yeah, so the first thing I would do is just to make sure that in starting to be an ally or an advocate, that you don't sort of wave it as a badge of honour. I think that's really important. I was very interested in just particularly all the stuff that's recently been in the news about safety of women, and then along comes International Women's Week, and I found myself just sort of seeing a lot of posts from men that it was almost like, waving a badge, oh, I'm a feminist, and I just kind of wanted to say that this is not a moment for us as men to be virtue signalling. This is a moment for us to be pausing, to be reflecting, to perhaps hear some hard truths, and to make sure we do better. And exactly the same applies in the context of race as well. And so that would be my first thing. I think really important is educating ourselves. And we've got education coming out of our ears. There are lots of books that we can read on this. I mean, just quickly, my encouragement would be, read Ben Lindsay, We Need to Talk About Race, an excellent book that actually looks at this kind of from a church perspective. But there's a lot of other reading out there that can be read. So that would be my second thing, to educate ourselves. I think thirdly, to do the deeper listening, even if it's uncomfortable. I do think to deal with this stuff, we've all got to go to a place of discomfort, and it's until we are uncomfortable, it is until we actually begin to deal with it. When it begins to hurt, that's the moment when you're actually beginning to deal with the real issues. And what I've found is that some people just sort of want to quickly move on before the deeper work is done. Do the deep educational work, do the deep listening, follow some people on social media, some voices that you haven't followed before. Look at what people have been saying before. Some of the conversations that are happening now are not new conversations. Think of some of the work of Martin Luther King. Think of some of the work of Malcolm X in America. Over here, Darcus Howe is someone that's hugely influenced me. Someone like Kate Coleman, and some of her perspective on women in leadership. There are so many voices that are speaking into this, and we need to hear those voices.
Thank you so much. Those 3 points, Mike. Don't wear the badge of being an ally. let's keep talking, educate ourselves, and keep doing the deep listening and talking about these issues. And one of the themes that's come through really strongly from everything that you've shared is becoming more okay with being uncomfortable, with maybe getting it wrong, with it being maybe a lot challenging often. And there's a great question here in the comment from Paul. Have we got time for another question, Matt? Yeah. Paul says, our church is multi-ethnic, which is great, but we have a way to go. I'm aware our Black members are undergoing lots of racist experiences, microaggressions, etc., in their daily lives, which they mostly still keep to themselves. How can they best be supported pastorally? I think Paul's involved in the leadership of that church, if I'm wrong.
Yeah, and there's a lot of insightfulness in the question, because the truth is that most Black people are uncomfortable in talking about racism because we've spent our lives denying it, or if not denying it, then actually internalizing it. And then every now and then it kind of comes out. And so making sure that your church is going overboard in its welcome and in its recognition that that is Black people's lived experience in every day. And so in the church community, it is absolutely not going to be like that, that your experience is going to be one of acceptance, of welcome, of empowerment, and actually of we really need you on board if we are going to journey this journey effectively in the kingdom of God. So yeah, we just need to choose that the kingdom is going to be completely opposite from the world. And of course, it should be.
Yeah, great. If I've been looking at the chat as well, there's some really interesting points here, and maybe we've got time just to jump on one more. And they're all biggies in the sense it's a big topic. This is something though that caught my eye because we've not really touched on it yet in our conversation. And this is from Greg, and it's about the way that the debate we often inherit it from the USA as a black-white polarization. But he's thinking about the diversity of communities that he's familiar with, whether that's sort of inner London or Burnley. And so when you bring religion into the picture, so what's the sort of place of that kind of interfaith dynamic? And here we are in a conversation as Christians, but we may or may not have a great deal of understanding or empathy with people of the Muslim faith who find themselves often subject to attack and intimidation and because of the kind of global context that we're in. So what about that, Mike?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. I mean, firstly, I think that generally, and I know I'm not assuming everyone on here is an evangelical, but certainly, I've grown up in the evangelical tradition. And actually, for some, well, I was going to say for some unknown reason, but I kind of stopped myself. For whatever reason, evangelicals run a million miles when we're having interfaith conversations. I was involved in a wonderful interfaith conversation last night with interfaith leaders from the Jewish community, from the Hindu community, from the Sikh community, from the Christian community, and I was asked to a Muslim community, and I was asked to bring a perspective of celebrating Easter in Africa, because I'm of Jamaican heritage, Caribbean heritage, but my wife is Ghanaian, West African heritage, and I just learned so much about other people's faiths, and I came off the call just so inspired with just as much conviction as ever about my own faith, but a healthier respect and understanding of other people. So that's my first thing. I think the second thing is, and you know, talking about a British context, mentioned there Burnley. I've lived in the north of England, albeit on the Yorkshire side rather than on the Lancashire side. But actually, you know, a couple of years ago, I had the privilege of visiting, a year and a half ago, of visiting Pakistan. It was a beautiful, beautiful time, beautiful culture, incredible food, but the hospitality and the understanding that I gained of that culture just transformed my understanding of people from South Asia, from Pakistan or India or Bangladesh, kind of in this country. And my encouragement would be is actually, when lockdown's over, get out and visit those places, not as people who are privileged, but as people who are going humbly to learn.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mike. That's such a good response. And yeah, that's something I, for one, am really looking forward to being able to do once this lockdown is over. Laura, do you have any sort of further reflections just based on what you've been listening to over the last few minutes?
I'm just sort of taking a step back and thinking, you know, what of all the things that you've shared, and there's been so much in this last hour that you've shared that's been inspiring and challenging, and I'm just thinking about the piece around educating ourselves, the piece around having the conversations, the piece around getting out there and being uncomfortable and opening up some of this stuff. And I just wanted to thank you as well for the point you made about within the church of creating spaces where things are really radically different. And, you know, almost, and I think you did say this, going overboard with the welcome, going overboard with this is a place where, you know, we're not going to display some of these same attitudes that you've been exposed to, and that of course requires that turning inwards. So I just wanted to thank you for that. And I want to encourage every single one of us, in myself included on this call, to really hear what Mike's been saying and to continue to do the deep listening and to continue to do the work for ourselves, because we each need to take that responsibility for being anti-racist. And thank you for making that very clear distinction, being anti-racist and to taking that stand. I'm just curious, Mike, if there's anything else. I know there's a conversation going on in the chat about what are evangelicals scared of with the interfaith conversation, so I just want to acknowledge that. If there's anything else that's coming up for you that's bubbling up at the moment you want to share as we round up here today, Mike.
Is just that as Christians, we have got to move beyond Jesus and me. Our personal faith in Jesus does not guarantee that we have done this deeper work. This whole issue of racial justice, I believe, is an ongoing work of sanctification that the Holy Spirit needs to do in our lives. And we need to be ready to open ourselves up in that area as we would do in any other sinful area that we are struggling with. And if we do that and we allow the right people to come alongside us, we hear the right prophetic voices, God will not only change and transform our lives, but he will make us into agents of change that will transform our communities, our nation, and our world. May we step into the shoes of the Harriet Tubmans. May we step into the shoes of the Rosa Parks. May we step into the shoes of the Martin Luther Kings. May God use us in our generation and in our communities for his glory. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. That was almost a sort of a benediction to end with. Thank you so much. I feel blessed. Okay, I'm just going to trailer next month, if that's all right, folks. So next month we've got coming up Ruth Valerio, who is a well-known speaker and author and activist on environmental issues. She's been at that for 20, 30 years. She's now one of the directors at Tier Fund. So we've invited her to have a conversation with us about living more lightly. One of the things that's sort of significant for those of us who get involved in common change groups is that when we start really thinking critically about our lives in terms of what we can do together through our giving, we start to realize that so much of the, so many of the line items in our bank statements perhaps relate to things that maybe we don't necessarily need to be spending our money on in the first place. So I guess we'll be having a conversation about sort of decluttering our lives and simplifying our lives and not sort of buying into the rat race around us. If you weren't at January or February, you can see them now. We've got a little archive that we're building up on the Common Change website. So you can go to commonchange.uk/events. You scroll down to the bottom of the page. You'll see the conversation with Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove talking about sharing lives and sharing resources. You'll see last month's session there from Natalie Williams, which was a fantastic session where we were just really talking about this slightly odd question of the deserving and the undeserving and how we respond to that in terms of the wider culture and narrative around poverty. So yeah, we're building up an archive. Mike will be on there within the next few days when we've had a chance to edit this little talk. And so share it with your friends because this is an important conversation for people to be tuned into.